Okay, so we're going to look at HTML5 drag and drop. I found this rather difficult to implement. It's kind of complicated. And this tutorial here at HTML5rocks.com turned out to be real useful. And for doing your assignment, you'll probably want to look at that. I'm not going to give you the code for this. You need to kind of learn how to implement this yourself. But you can use the code there to figure out how to do that, as well as this video. Thought I'd show you the video, tutorial site real quickly here. So I gave you that URL already on the slide. And one thing I'm going to warn you is he builds this gradually. So you can't just copy the code. You need to go through it, and then you'll change the code as you go through. But he shows all the code. So he starts by building this, which doesn't let you drop, but it does implement the drag. And he had some style stuff that I could not get to work on mine, so you might do better than me. And then finally he has a working example here, which you can see works fine. So that's going to be your primary source for getting this to work, and so you want to look at that and my videos. Okay, so let's start by looking at the HTML markup. Standard HTML5 page. I am using jQuery, but minimally. I think that jQuery probably does drag and drop a hell of a lot easier than doing it like I'm doing it here with native JavaScript. And a couple places I found I couldn't use the jQuery. I had to revert back to the JavaScript to do it. I have a single style sheet here. It's really minimal. I have a single JavaScript file, which we'll look at. Here within my section, I have a header, and then I have in my main ID area, which I've called columns to apply style to it, I have 4 divs. These are the draggable divs. So you can see div ID div 1, div 2, div 3, and div 4. That's what you want to have to be draggable. I'm following along with the directions for the assignment, so I have a bulleted list in the first div, an image in the second, a paragraph in the third, and an image in the fourth. And one of the things I tried to do initially is I tried to make the content within the divs draggable, and it turns out you can't really do that with the images. So what you want to do is you want to make the divs draggable themselves. And actually what you're dragging is the content of the divs, as you'll see when we look at the JavaScript. So let's go ahead and take this into design view real quick. You can see here are the 4 divs. And I got pictures of my 2 dogs. So this is Errol Flynn and Betty Davis. And then here's my paragraph, and here's my unordered list. So before we go further, let's take a look at the CS as well, because I thought it might be useful to remind you how to do some of the layout stuff here. And so let me go to the CS. So there's just some stuff on the body, the font that I'm using. I like that comic font for my demos. You know, I'm fond of that yellow background color. And then this content area is where the divs are, and I used a slightly different color that would work with the yellow as a different shade there. And let's see, yeah, and that's kind of the total page width is 90%. And then we don't have to worry about that draggable. I had to put padding on my columns, and then within the columns I have the divs. So these are the divs that are the 4 content areas that are going to be draggable. And I went ahead and put a border around those, and then I put a border radius. Notice have to use the browser prefixes still for the radiuses to make them work. And let's see, this is code that creates a dashed border when you do the drag over, and that doesn't quite work correctly. That shows up sometimes but not others. It's real touchy. And then what I wanted to do was the layout here. Let me see where I have that. I thought that was on the column divs, but I guess it's not here. So it uses a float left, and here we go. Okay, so on the columns, I've got the width of the column set to 20%. There's only 4 columns, so that leaves a lot of extra space for margins and padding and all that. And then they are all designed to float left. And then to make this work, you have to set the width. Originally, when I didn't have the width, the overflow would make the columns run out of line. And then the margin right, the padding is straightforward. Again, the bullets. One thing also on the footer, I had to put the clear both in to make sure that the footer would appear at the bottom. So let's go back and look at the index.html in the design. And here's the footer, and I always put a horizontal rule on my footer. So I had to use the clear both to get that to move from over here on the right hand side down below the columns. And I thought about trying to set these columns to all have the same height. It would look cool, but really because the text goes so much further, I just decided not to do that. Alright, now let's go ahead. Oh yeah, okay, so we'll go back and look at the markup. So again, on the 4 divs in the HTML, I have the draggable equals true. Of course, you could just go ahead and add this into the JavaScript as well, but I put it in the markup. Let's look now at the script, and this is really complicated. So I am using jQuery, and I have the onload function. I have 3 global variables, an array, which is the elements that are going to be draggable. And I got that from the Linda video. That's kind of cool because you can implement draggable in a real uniform way and simply add the elements that you want to be to draggable to the array, which you'll see in a minute. The drag and drop supported probably isn't really needed, but we just use that one time to figure out if the browser will support drag and drop. And then this drag source element I got from the website I showed you. That turns out to be the reference to the source element when you do the drag and drop. Because really, if you think about what you're doing with drag and drop here, you're swapping. You're not just dragging content into an empty pane. You're dragging some content into a second pane and then replacing the source that you just dragged from with the content you dragged over. So he uses the term target and source to talk about that, and I've left the comments in here. So we have an initialization function here, which I call at the very bottom here. And when I was developing this, I forgot to do that for a while. It took me a while to figure out why I wasn't doing anything at all. And so then basically this D&D supported, again, is this global variable. It just indicates if we have drag and drop. That's going to call a function here. Again, this came from the Linda video. And I've actually modified this. It had a bunch of code to handle old versions of IE below 6, which we don't really worry about too much anymore, so I removed that. So it's kind of interesting the way this works. If you can create an element, any element here actually doesn't have to be a span, and then it can be draggable, then it returns true, and that means that the browser supports draggable. That's kind of a funky way to figure out if the browser supports draggable or not. And then otherwise you return false, and that means it doesn't. So this master loop here looks to see if it'll support the drag and drop. And then if it doesn't, it says the browser does not support drag and drop. Originally in the Linda code, he had all these functions to display stuff on the page and that, and I just replaced all those with console log so we could follow what was going on. Okay, so we have this array of drag and drop elements, and then you can see here that I just added these. Interestingly enough, I tried to use the $ notation here, and it didn't work, and I kept getting undefined reference, so I went ahead and just used the straight JavaScript version. So this adds my 4 divs to the array here, D&D elements, drag and drop elements. And again, I still have all this console stuff in here because I was debugging it as I went, and that's not necessary anymore. Then you're going to see that we have a series of events, and not all of these are actually needed. The intermediate ones are mainly used for style, and some of that I was not able to work to get to work. So we have drag start, drag enter, drag over, drag leave, drop, and drag end. And I rearranged these so they're pretty much in the order that they occur. And so what this syntax is we're adding an event listener for this event. That's the first parameter. And then we have a function that handles that, a named function, which we'll see in a minute is below in the code. And that's right there. And then this last parameter, false, has to do with percolating the event. So that basically tells it not to send the event further up the chain, which is called bubbling. So that says don't bubble. Okay, that's kind of important because the browsers don't always handle all the events exactly the same way. And so what will happen is you'll end up with an event handler, 2 event handlers that try to handle the same event, which you don't want. So as soon as I've handled the event here, I want to turn the bubbling off, and that's what the false does in each case. So I wanted you to take a look at this because it's really a nice way to do this. I've added all these elements to an array instead of having 6 loops that add all these or individual statements. So it's really a nice way, and then you can see how I could easily add additional divs to the page and then just put them in here and plug and play. So that's a good way to structure your code. Okay. The rest of this is just these events that handle the drag and drop. So we have the drag start, the drag enter, the drag over, the drag leave, the handle drop, which is the actual drop event, and then the drag end. Okay. So the handle drag start is basically it's going to set the global variable. So this is the source, so the drag source element, and I'll need that later on when I actually copy the content across to do the actual content for the drag and the drop. And then notice this style opacity equals 0.4. That was kind of a nice effect that basically makes the part that I'm dragging translucent, but I couldn't find in the code anywhere where he turned it off, and when I implemented it I couldn't get it to turn off, so I commented that out. Maybe when I show you this I'll put that back in. Anyhow, this important thing here is we got to grab the source, and then he has a long explanation of how the data transfer element works. But basically we want to have it move, and then you have to control what type of data. So we want text HTML. It turns out what we're going to do is we're going to use the inner HTML in each case for grabbing the source element and the target, setting the target when we do the drag and drop. You can see the drag end doesn't do anything at all, just has a console log. That would work, be used if we were using the styling better. And then here's the handle drag over. So this is the event where you actually pull the content over the target. So you pull the source content over the target, and you have to prevent the default operation for us to do the drop. You'll see this in all the code examples. They all do this. And then for browser inconsistency, you also want this function to return false every time because for some browsers that's how it works. And then I'm not sure why, but oh, okay, here we go. So drop effects is move, which is the one that we set up. And then let's see, handle the drag enter. So I'm a little confused about drag enter and drag over and drag leave. They seem to be fairly fine-tuned functions. Basically what this drag enter does is it adds a class, a CSS class called over, and let's take a quick look at that here. This is also one of the things that I had a little trouble getting to work here. Where is that? Let's see. Right there. So it's being added to the div that's being dragged and dropped. And really all it does is it changes the border to a dash instead of a solid. And that's very touchy. I can get that to work, and when it does, it doesn't turn off. I'm not sure why. So again, if we look at this, that's really the only thing that we're doing here. The drag enter method is playing this with the style, and similarly with the drag leave, where we try to remove the over. So those aren't really necessary for the process, but they're used to help add the style. And if you look at his example in the tutorial, it works a little bit better than what I have here. Although mine gets the job done, it's not as pretty. So here's kind of the meat of the function, which is the handle to drop event. And first thing we have to do is we stop the propagation, which keeps the browser from trying to do something other than the drag and drop. And then this little line of code here, if drag source element is not equal to this, just prevents us from dragging something onto itself. And then again, we're using the inner HTML. So the drag source element's inner HTML is set to this inner HTML. And then this inner HTML is set to the data from the transfer object. So if you know the classical computer science, we have what's called a swap algorithm. There's a proof that says that you always have to have a temporary variable. So if I want to switch A and B, I have to set temp to A. Then when I set A to B, that overwrites A, and otherwise I would lose it, and then I set B to temp. And so here we're using the data transfer as the temp to hold the data. So you can see that right here on this line, when I set the inner HTML of the source, I've actually completed the drop, and now I have to go back and set the inner HTML of the and I have to set the destination to the data that I copied originally from the source into the transfer object. Okay, let's take a look at this in Chrome. And let me reload here. Oops, didn't want that. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay, so here are my 4 columns. You can see I've got a border with rounded corners on them. And one problem I had for some reason is the bullets were sticking outside of the border. So I ended up having to add a left-hand margin onto this. So you can see as I start to drag it, it moves over, and I let it go. That works. I can move this back. I can move this here. So I can completely rearrange these, and it works pretty well. And the only thing that I don't have working again is the pretty styling. So in the one style, he sets uses a scale to scale this down. That works better in his example because he has 4 images that he's playing with. So before we close out here, let's go back in and let's see if I can turn that back on to show you. So here's the opacity, and this is in the handle drag start. So we'll save that. So let's see what's going on here. Source element equals this. I just had an idea how to fix it. That's why I'm pausing. But anyhow, we'll try it and see. So we'll go ahead and reload. And notice everything pushes back. So now as I grab this, it actually changes the opacity down to 0.4. But the problem is, you can see that this retained that. So it didn't turn it off. And that's why I disabled that. I couldn't figure out how to get it to go back here. So now see, this opacity is still set at 0.4. Eventually I can get it to where they all are like that, and it just never reverts. Okay. That'd be kind of cool. We could do that and get that to work. Let's see. So handle drag start. So let me think about this for a second. So target this element is the source node. So that sets the opacity of the source to 4. And then the problem is when we copy it, it's set there. So we might be able to fix this by grabbing this and moving it down here. So we'll copy the data before we set the opacity. That might take care of it. We'll see. That's kind of be nice if I got it fixed. Okay, let's go ahead and reload this. And so then I'm going to grab it. The opacity changes. I copy it over. Nope, that didn't do the trick. So the opacity is being applied to this div, and when I copy into it, now it's still got that. Oh, wait a second. Now that's funny, because when I copied this back, up for a second there. Yeah, see, it's not working kind of consistently. Alright, I'm going to try one more thing, and then I'll just call this done. So, let's see now. So we have to set the opacity back to 1 to change this. By the way, 4 seems really small. Let's make that 6 so it's not quite as transparent. And so handle drag end. So let's see. This. So that's the source that we're setting. And then when we drop it over here, oh, cool. It looks like we should be able to use the, let's see. I think I might have it working now. So then I just want to set this back to 1. Alright, let's see if I fix that. That'd be really cool. Alright, reloaded, grab it. Opacity now is a little less than before. Yeah, it seems like it's still... Maybe it's just selected. Nope, nope. I didn't get it. Okay. Alright, so again, you can just not do that, and it'll work. Play around with the code. If you look at the Linda video, he uses the scale function to make this slightly smaller as you drag it, which is kind of cool. It almost looks like the browser does that for you. Here I'm in Chrome, by the way. Alright, I think we're good enough here. So I'm going to get this up for you, and I'll send you a quick note letting you know that I got it finished.